most important thing for me when I am talking to someone about their creativity is to help them to understand that it is the way that they express themselves. And that expression does come from a combination of our lived and our learned experience, our interests, our belief systems. There are so many different aspects of it, because there are so many people out there with a misguided understanding of creativity, believing that it's truly down to how much artistic skill they have, and they then relate artistic skill to whether they can draw or not. And that's not even it. You know, to be an artist is to be able to sing, to design a garden and plant all the plants, to cook, to have an amazing conversation. That is all, to me, as versions of being an artist. It's not about the traditional painter or writer or, you know, those kinds of things.
Hi, I'm Leda, and I'd like to welcome Shannon Dunn today, who I'm going to be speaking with. Shannon, among other things, is an author and an artist, and her passion is empowering women to use their wisdom to improve their lives and the lives of others. So, of course, I wanted to speak to you, Shannon. Please.
Of course.
I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
Oh, well, thank you, Leda. Beyond that lovely introduction already, but I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation with you and just to see what we end up talking about, because we've had some great conversations about creativity so far. But aside from being an author and the creator of an archetypal framework called the Thrive Factor, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that and its archetypes, I have been a long-term coach working in the business and leadership space. So coaching for a couple of decades now, which kind of blows me away, and specifically in my own business for over 16 years. But you're right, I am all about women really connecting with themselves. I often say that self-awareness and self-understanding are two of the biggest underrated personal assets and life and business assets that we could ever have. They get ignored as, that's a kind of nice thing to look at who I am and understand who I am. But, it's that real, true, powerful understanding of self that can take us to a whole next level, which is, for me, is something I refer to as thriving and being in your effortless success zone. So I think that's it in a nutshell. It condensed like a long time into a short space.
That's exactly where I wanted you to start, because yes, I think understanding of self is so critical, and so many of us either don't do that or get to it quite late. And I have to tell you that over the years I can get lost in all the different profiling techniques, because I just love them and I get really excited about them. And when I was introduced to yours, the Thrive Factor archetypes, Shannon, it was so amazing, because I've done the Myers-Briggs, a whole lot of different things.
Haven't we all?
And this is such a creative and magical way for me to see myself in the new space that I'm in. So please, won't you tell us a little bit about those and how you came to them and why? Yeah.
There's so many questions in there and so many answers, and it could take a very long time, but I don't want to be succinct with our conversation today. But the Thrive Factor framework is a framework of 12 archetypes that I personally created over 12 years ago now. That blows me away too. For the first few years of using them, it sort of felt like it was this thing I used, and all of a sudden here we are over a decade later, and I've been using it consistently with my clients, the women that I work with in business and life, for such a long time now. But I have come from a lifetime of nerding out on self-understanding. In my teens, I was reading the work of Carl Jung, which is some time ago now, and when we had to go to a library to find information, we couldn't just look up online, right? Younger people listening to this may not understand, but Leda and I both understand what that was like. And for me, that was reading his work and learning from other psychologists and psychiatrists from the early to mid-19th century was a way for me to broaden my innate curiosity, I think you could say, to understand the human behaviour. who are we? Why do we do what we do? You know, what are we here to do, or who are we here to be? And I don't know where that came from, but it was just this innate curiosity in me, which has then continued through my lifetime. It's influenced the different study that I've done. So while I'm qualified in a lot of business things, I'm also a qualified counsellor and art therapist. And creativity, along with the nerding out, so do say it like that, of really understanding human behaviour, has been a key influence in the way that I work in the world and want to be in the world and want to encourage others in the world. So there are 12 archetypes in the framework. We may talk about a few of them as we go along, but going through all 12 is a minimum hour quick discussion just to give the highlights of them. But I loved what you shared just a moment ago about your experience with them, because I consistently have received that feedback. And now I have women that have trained and done a Thrive Factor coach certification. So there are others out there who are also working with the Thrive Factor framework and archetypes with their own clients. And there is a consistency that we receive, that I've done so many, you know, quizzes, assessments, profiles, like from most of our clients, because there is an innate curiosity in human beings to understand who we are. But what people have said is like, it's sort of, something sort of described me, but not really, or I felt like I tried to fit myself into what this description was because it's what it said I should be, but I didn't really feel right. And yet consistently with the Thrive Factor, the combination of archetypes that we each have, which could be anywhere between 3 and 6 of 12 archetypes, has been so affirmed by so many of the thousands of women that have been profiled now and have worked with them, that it's like, it just gets me. And I love that you use magical, which is one of your words for your shapeshifter alchemist.
Yeah,
of course.
The alchemist is just this magical thing that inspires me so much. It's like, oh yeah.
I know, that's so good. But no matter what a woman's combination of archetypes are, she reflects back that it's like, how do you know this about me? And, you know, I can't believe, like, I finally can see now that part of me, or that trait, or that thought pattern I had, or the behavior that I've been judged or criticized for by myself or others, can actually be my greatest superpower, or can be the thing that can make the difference in me going from where I am now to where I want to be. And that was a lot of my thought behind it. I'm with a combination of 4 archetypes that I have. I think into the future very, very clearly, and in often a very innovative way. So that's my visionary creator archetype. So your pioneer seeker archetype has some similarities with that, but it's in a different kind of a way. My mentor teacher is the wisdom woman. She loves to learn and she loves to share wisdom. So that's a real key thing for me to do, honor that for myself in the way that I also work and teach. The inspire a believer archetype, it's all about being inspired and being an inspiration and using your energy positively and as a real potentialist in the world. And then my 4th archetype, the liberator engineer, is about creating freedom and liberation and ease and effortlessness by sharing framework, systems, solutions, and outcomes. So you can see just from all of that I was wired with the right archetypes to create something. And the visionary creator is the one archetype that I have seen that has the most potential to create something original in the world, because they say there are no original concepts and ideas. And certainly archetypes are not original, but this framework and these 12 archetypes are an original. And it took me a long time to get my head around that and actually see it for what it was and celebrate it. Yeah, which is so important to do.
I think that's why we connect. I think I've got 3 of your 4 archetypes plus another one, which means we have a lot in common. And
that's right.
That it gives us a language to understand each other, which is so interesting, I think, how you work with people. Shannon, what I wanted to ask you also, because the archetypes are your tool for how you work with people, but I think they very strongly relate to your creative side as well.
They do.
Help me understand the connection a little bit better.
I understand the connection. And I just it reminded me that you introduced me as an artist as well right at the beginning, and I am. Not in a professional way as such necessarily, depends on your definition of professional artist, but that's not my core purpose in terms of business or creating income, is not through my art. I do it more for the love of it. I have at times definitely created in an artistic way with the intention of selling, but I found that I fell out of love with the creative process by trying to make it a thing that I had to earn income from, which is not what I wanted. So one of my 4 archetypes that I mentioned is the visionary creator. So I've got her here. So this is the image of her. Yeah, it's always fun to the screen there.
Way for anyone.
Yes, it is. There are images for all 12 of the archetypes, and this is all my own artwork. And in fact, it was in the very early days I had defined and was very clear and comfortable, excited about the names of the 12 archetypes and had a high level summary of what they stood for, what they were all about. Every one of them has 2 names. That was just something it just happened like that. There was not an intentional, every archetype needs to have a double-barreled name. It just flowed like that. And then there was a pattern, so I stuck with that. It's very liberator engineer to do that kind of thing. And then the visionary creator, sort of, it's like she kind of chimed in with we need to see what they look like to take the understanding of them to the next level, which is very much a key part of that archetype. So because I have painted all my life using a number of different mediums, I sat down and I created these 12 images. The images that we see around the world today of the Thrive Act archetypes are the original images that were painted in 2010 and 11. They have not changed. They won't change. I've been challenged and suggestions that they should change to be more in line with, more of an inclusive, multicultural view of the world. But I created them at the time based on my understanding and my lens of the world. And growing up in Australia in the environment that I did, that was, anyway, don't need to explain that anymore. But I also, it's important to honour the original work. But the visionary creator said she literally got down and got stuck into the paint. So these are watercolour pencils and pen and ink on around the outside. So every one of them has their own. Here's the shapeshifter. Of course, we have to share your magical lady, Leda. So every one of them has, as I said, their own sense of personality, which is what an archetype really is. The word archetype comes from the Latin or really ancient language of arche and tupos, meaning first impression. And it is a focus on the psychology of who we are. Using or honouring my visionary creator's guidance to paint them and to bring them to life in a visual sense also gave me an opportunity to understand the archetypes in a whole new way, because I very intuitively painted each of these, images. There's the mentor teacher, each of the archetypes, the shapeshifter, alchemist, the queen ruler. I intuitively painted each of them. And there was then when I went back into the images, I saw another dimension of what they're all about, which is also very visionary creator. The visionary creator artist is also the one artist that one archetype, I should say, that I have seen more consistently has an artistic skill. Whether she's aware of it or using it or not is another thing entirely. Every archetype has her own creative expression, but creativity and art and being, artistic, I'm sure we'll get into this, is not the same thing. Having artistic skill is a form of creative expression. Being an artist or being artistic is not the same as being creative. We've had numerous discussions over the years with people about this. So again, it's very much the creativity has just flown through everything that I do. I have 2 books in print at the moment. I have published 3 books. One is no longer in print because it doesn't need to be, because it was the original version of what was the Thrive Factor before it became the Thrive Factor. And when I published the actual Thrive Factor book in early 2019, we didn't need to keep the other one out there in the world. But my books are full of colour and imagery. I look at them as a work of art. It's not just about the words that are in them. It's about the way they look, the way they feel, the whole experience. And then when I published my newest book, Braggadocious, which is about the bold art of self-celebration, but based on each month of the 12 months of a year, as a year-long journey of self-celebration, each month is guided by one of the trifecta archetypes. But this too is full of color, and you've got the archetypal images and, you know, the downloads that can come when you resource and, you know, access the book. Again, all full color, because I want there to be a bold, bright experience in the world. So
that's great, Shannon. And I think what you've expressed explains so clearly, just as an example of how, yes, creativity can have an artistic aspect, but it doesn't have to, because you've created essentially your whole business, and the tools that you use come from your diverse aspects of experience, wisdom, and knowledge. So they're not just pretty pictures.
No.
Yes, the card for each archetype has an image. So there's the visual representation, the arty side, but it's found on psychology and business and your understanding and your lived experience, as it were. So
that's it.
I think that's such a great example of how accessing your innate creative side and expressing it in whatever form is right and relevant for you can lead to something new and original in the world.
It certainly can. And I think the most important, no, it does not have to be that. Yeah, the most important thing for me when I am talking to someone about their creativity is to help them to understand that it is the way that they express themselves. And that expression does come from a combination of our lived and our learned experience, our interests, our belief systems. There are so many different aspects of it, because there are so many people out there with a misguided understanding of creativity, believing that it's truly down to how much artistic skill they have. And they then relate artistic skill to whether they can draw or not. And that's not even it. You know, to be an artist is to be able to sing, to design a garden and plant all the plants, to cook, to have an amazing conversation. That is all, to me, as versions of being an artist. It's not about the traditional painter or writer or, you know, those kinds of things.
In fact, I'm a visual artist, and I don't know if people still play Pictionary, but Pictionary is a game where, you know, you draw things to represent words. And so if back in the day we would be playing Pictionary, everybody would say, Leda, we want you on the team. I would go,
yes, I know. I remember that because I was that person too.
It's like, I can't just come up with those drawings. It's not my expression. And so, yeah, even for those of us who can draw, we sometimes don't.
And I know my experience, you may have had the same, Leda, and that sounds like it just from the Pictionary experience, that when you are labelled as creative, but it's artistic, I know that I found that there's been different times in my life when there's been a lot of pressure with that. Mm-hmm. It's that you're so creative, you'll come up with what to do. Like, so there's an aspect of it through my corporate business career, and even prior to that, I was a registered nurse a long time ago. And I look at creativity as as I said, the way we express ourselves, but it's also the way we innovate, we evolve, the way we learn, the way we problem solve. So people would refer to that as creative, and then they'd find out that I paint and I write, and then they would say, you know, well, Shannon can do it. She's the creative one here. She'll come up with a concept, a vision, a design, the colors, and sometimes that felt like an excessive amount of pressure, because that was not necessarily my lived experience as an artist and creative. Yeah,
exactly. And it also means other people are not, they're handing it over to you and they're blocking their own creativity. And in fact,
outsourcing creativity.
And really, we're all creative. We just lose sight of it. And I know that in the process that I use when I work with my clients is, I kind of describe it as it comes in from the side, because I ask them to do creative activities in a way that they're not focusing on the need to be creative, and they reconnect with something inside themselves, their values, their beliefs, but also I think that innate child who just picks up the pencil and plays.
I know I love watching a child just being in the world, because yes, they could be playing with pencils or crayons or markers or paint or clay, but they also, it's the way that they'll get their toys or their books or their imaginary friends, and they just create an experience for themselves and others if there are other children around, or the adults that they know. My 5-year-old niece drags me into all sorts of scenarios and this, and she told me what all the things are, and I'm like, okay, just go with it. Just go keep it, because she's convinced that thing over there is a certain something. Yep, so we'll just go with that. But they haven't yet had the world tell them that everything has to have a meaning and a label. Their imaginations are open and broad and wild and excited, and can get so engrossed in what they're doing and what they're discovering. There's so much curiosity and ingenuity even, and they problem solve, they come up with solutions and answers and things, and they make something else, and there's no question about it until the adult world comes in. And this often happens when we go to school. The adult world comes in and tells us that things need to look and be and feel a certain way for us to be okay in the world. Yeah. So this is different depending on where we've grown up, because there are cultural influences. But I know in my growing up in Australia, it was very much that, a certain thing like a tree had a brown trunk and green leaves. If you look at trees, they don't have brown trunks and green leaves. And you know that. But, and I remember teaching art years ago and, teaching some basic concepts. And one of the exercises I used to set the week before we would do something, I would give everyone a hint as to what we were doing, because the fear of getting it wrong was huge for a lot of the people that were coming and learning with me. And people wanted to be as prepared as they could be. And while I tried to hold back to let their natural creativity come forward, sometimes it was actually more useful and helpful just to provide some concept. And I remember this one time I did this exercise numerous times, and I would say, next week we're going to look at nature in a different way, and you're going to be painting, because we were using paint as the medium, you're going to be painting a tree. I said, I want you to spend the week looking at all the trees that you have in your surrounds, in your yard, if you're out for a walk, if you go out to nature somewhere, because next week you're not to use the colours brown or green to paint your tree. And they'd immediately just, ashen faces. Well, what do you mean? It's like, go and look at trees, look at the bark, look at the leaves. And it was such a beautiful experience to then hear them come back, and we'd have a discussion around what they discovered by stopping looking at the world through the lens of what they were told a tree needed to look like or should look like or does look like, and let themselves really see what was there.
And that's exactly what being creative is, in whatever you're applying it to. It's looking at the same things but seeing something new.
Yeah.
And I think that we can learn to do that in everything that we're doing. We start to bring, well, that's about changing your mindset, isn't it? To being creative.
So much changing your mindset, challenging the belief systems that you've adopted, which are often limiting as we get to adulthood, challenging the behaviours that have become just how we do things. I found that in a lot of the formal and corporate business settings that I have worked in at different times, that rigidity is but this is how we've always done it, so this is how we'll do it, used to frustrate me so much. And perhaps there's no surprise that I have attracted and worked with a significant number of clients who would describe themselves as innovative people. They love innovation. They love challenging the status quo. They love like the pioneer seeker in you. They love disrupting, this is how it's always done. And they don't necessarily describe themselves as creative initially, but they will talk about themselves and the things that interest them and the way they wish to work in using terms that I would say are creative, and I love challenging them and saying, so you're such a creative individual, and they kind of look at me, and then we have the discussion about being an artist versus being creative, and they're like, oh yeah, I am. I'm the problem solver, I'm the solution creator, I'm the person who sees things differently, who gets curious, who challenges when someone's like, this is how it has to be done, and I'm like, no, that's the kind of responses, and they're the kind of people I love to be around, because I love to see how many different possibilities there are to something. My business originally, it's called Thrive Factor Co. now, to more in line with the brand of the Thrive Factor Archetypes, but my original business name was Creative Possibility.
That makes sense to you.
Yeah, exactly. It's still my company name. It's just not my trading name. But that's how I view the world. That there is infinite creative possibility. It's just about tapping into it and letting go of the meanings and judgments and criticisms and things that we have or we've taken on board from others and perceived in a certain way that tell us we're not creative, because we are.
Absolutely. I did an exercise with someone just the other day, and it's really simple exercise where I get people to just join 2 dots. And I say to them, draw 2 dots, join 2 dots, and they draw a line. Then I say, draw 2 more dots, and now join them in as many ways as you possibly can. And suddenly, and she was like, I just didn't give myself permission the first time. The second time, permission. So I think that really that's the simplest thing, is to give yourself permission to be curious and
curious, to play, to see different ways, and to go against the natural or innate, this is how it's done. Like, as you said, 2 dots, so we do a straight line. But that may not be there. The straight line is the logical, constructed way to get from one point to the other.
And it's the easy, habitual way. So our brains tend to just function on what we know rather than
efficiency. And yet, through creativity, which comes from that curiosity, we can actually create greater efficiency over time when we see other ways to do things.
Absolutely. It's so fascinating.
Isn't it?
Time. I know you and I need to meet up for a good long coffee sometime.
I know. One day when we're in the same place. So we're on opposite sides of Australia, but that's all right. That will change at some point.
So if I can ask you, one last thought perhaps to leave people who are watching this with. Perhaps I'm going to ask you to just tell them this. Why is it important for people to go out and explore their creative selves?
Oh, where do we go with that one? What's the immediate thing that comes to mind, which for me will not be the logical? I think there is such a gift for living life to the fullest when you go out and you engage in the world through the lens of curiosity and creativity. You just see things differently, and you are able to let go of the preconceived ideas, as we were saying before, that things have to be one way and that I am only one way. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine recently who has been trying to work through some challenges that she's had, and we looked at it through her archetypes, and it's like, there's a rigid part of her mediator diplomat archetype, which can be very black and white and rigid and pragmatic about things. That was like, but this is just how it's always going to be. And I was like, oh no, don't even get me started. But I did launch into a whole tirade of, you've decided that. But it could also be this way and this way and this way and this way. And she sort of looked at me like her whole brain was kind of exploding and imploding at the same time as I was sharing with her all of the different possibilities that immediately came to my mind about the meaning she'd attached to something and all the different meanings that I could see to this in a particular scenario. Didn't necessarily excite her as much as I hoped it would. My inspirer believer got very excited about it. She doesn't have that archetype. She was more in this space of, now what do I do? It's like, you just start with one tiny, tiny step. Look at one other possibility for something. You don't need to go out and come up with all the possibilities. I do that innately, like it's a very natural part of my personality.
Yeah, other people, very overwhelming. It's just too.
Yeah. One thing, you know, if you're stuck in your ways and you don't like the way you're thinking, the way you're feeling, what you're doing, if you feel like you're in a rut or your energy isn't good or whatever it is, and you keep saying something or hearing something, or you've made a decision about something and you're stuck with that, you're telling yourself a story and feeding that to your mindset and your belief system, then challenge yourself to come up with one alternate meaning to that story.
That's a really simple step. So thank you. And I think that's a really
pleasure.
Anybody to start. If there's something bothering you, just be curious and explore, if you can, lots of other ways, but otherwise just one different way to approach the problem.
Yeah. And look at that scenario, look at your life, your work, your world through the lens of that scenario, that possibility. It might be very uncomfortable. It might feel like it's impossible, but that's okay. You're trying it on. It's like your shapeshifter will get this leader. It's like you're trying on a new scenario, a new identity for a moment in time. Anyone can do that.
I have an exercise I have people do, which is such fun, and I actually did it for myself the other day, is if you need to approach something differently, pick a character and dress the part. So I was going to a function where I was a little bit daunted by what I was going to be facing. So I decided, okay, who shall I be? And I just dressed up for it. And I felt completely
Very shapeshifter alchemist.
and so much fun. I think we have to leave it there. So Shannon, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
If people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
So the best place to go is the two websites that I have. If you want to know more about my work and my I guess my business coaching and consulting and the programs that I run, then the thrivefactorco.com. If you want to know specifically about the Thrive Factor archetypes, then thethrivefactor.com. So there's little differences there. They're the best places to go. And if you search for Shannon Dunn or the Thrive Factor, you will easily find me online in all the places.
And I will add the links at the end of the video. So Shannon, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Leda. Bye, everyone.